The substitute teacher arrived at Harlow Elementary on a Monday morning in October. Nobody had called for a substitute. The regular teacher, Mrs. Calloway, was not absent. She had not called in sick. She had not requested coverage. She was, as far as the school administration was aware, expected to be in her classroom at 8:15, the same as every other Monday morning. But when Mrs. Calloway arrived at school that morning, she found her classroom already occupied. The woman standing at the front of the room was tall and pale and dressed in clothes that were neat and appropriate, but somehow slightly wrong in a way that Mrs. Calloway could not immediately identify. Too formal, perhaps. The kind of clothing that belonged to a different decade. The children were already in their seats. They were completely silent. This alone was unusual. Mrs. Calloway's third grade class was not a silent group under any normal circumstances. They were 8 and 9 years old, and they arrived on Monday mornings carrying the accumulated energy of a weekend, and it typically took 15 minutes of structured activity to bring the room to anything resembling order. But they were sitting in perfect silence, with their hands folded on their desks and their eyes on the woman at the front of the room. Mrs. Calloway stepped into the doorway and asked if she could help. The woman turned and looked at her. She had very pale eyes, the kind of pale that made it difficult to determine their color. She said she was covering the class today. Mrs. Calloway said there must be a mistake. She was not absent. She was standing right here. The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at the class. She told them to open their reading books to page 47. 23 children opened their reading books to page 47 in perfect unison, without a word. Mrs. Calloway walked to the main office. She asked the school secretary who had arranged for a substitute in her classroom. The secretary looked up from her desk. She said she had no record of any substitute request for that classroom. She said the substitute register for the day showed no placements at Harlow Elementary at all. Mrs. Calloway asked the secretary to come with her to the classroom. They walked back down the corridor together. The classroom was empty. 23 children sat at their desks with their reading books open to page 47. No adult was in the room. Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway and looked at her class. She asked them where the woman had gone. 23 children looked at her with the same expression. A girl named Sophie in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Calloway called on her. Sophie said the teacher had left when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Mrs. Calloway asked what teacher had said before she left. Sophie looked at her steadily. She said the teacher had told them to be good. She said the teacher had told them that Mrs. Calloway was one of the good ones. She said the teacher had told them that not all the teachers who had stood at the front of this room had been good ones, and that some of them were still here. Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway of her classroom for a long moment. Then she walked to her desk and sat down and looked at the 23 children looking back at her. She asked them to turn to page 48. She did not ask any more questions about the woman who had been standing at the front of her room. But she thought about what Sophie had said for the rest of that day. And she thought about it the following morning when she arrived early and stood alone in her classroom before the children came in. She stood at the front of the room and looked at the rows of empty desks, and she had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that she was not the only one standing there, that the room was being shared in a way she did not fully understand, with whoever had stood at the front of it before her, and whoever had stood there before them, going back further than she wanted to think about, all of them still present in the room in some way, still teaching, still watching, still waiting for the children to open their books. Every year Millbrook High School took a whole school photograph. It was a tradition that went back to the founding of the school in 1932. The photographs were framed and hung in the main corridor in chronological order, a long unbroken line of images stretching from the present day back to the earliest years of the school's existence. Students walked past them every day without paying much attention. They were the kind of thing that faded into the background of a familiar environment, present but unnoticed, part of the wallpaper of the place. A history teacher named Mr. Alderton noticed something wrong with the photographs on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He was walking the corridor after the last class of the day when something caught his eye. He stopped. He was not sure what had made him stop. Something in his peripheral vision, some minor wrongness that his brain had registered before he had consciously identified it. He looked at the photographs on the wall. He looked at the one from 1987, a large group photograph, students and staff arranged on the steps outside the main entrance, rows of faces looking at the camera with the slightly self-conscious expressions that large group photographs always produced. He had walked past this photograph hundreds of times, but he had never noticed the figure standing at the far left edge of the image, a girl, standing slightly apart from the rest of the group, not looking at the camera, looking at the group. He leaned closer. She was dressed differently from the other students, not dramatically differently, but her clothing was wrong for 1987 in a way he could not immediately define. He looked at the photographs on either side of the 1987 image. He looked at the left edge of each photograph. The girl was in both of them. Same position, same slight separation from the group, same face turned away from the camera toward the other students. He went through every photograph on the wall, starting from the most recent and working backward. She was in all of them. Every single photograph going back to 1962, the same girl, the same position at the left edge of the frame, the same face turned away from the camera. She did not age. In the 1962 photograph, she looked exactly the same as in the photograph from last year. Mr. Alderton stood in the empty corridor for a long time. Then he went to the school archive and pulled the original contact sheets from the annual photographs going back as far as they were available. He found the contact sheet for 1987. He found the frame used for the corridor photograph. He looked at the left edge of the image. The girl was not there. He checked the contact sheets for 3 other years. In every case, the corridor photograph showed no figure at the left edge of the frame. He went back to the corridor and looked at the frame prints on the wall. She was in all of them. Present in the prints, absent from the original negatives. He stood in the corridor and looked at the long line of photographs stretching back decades. He looked at the figure in each one, always at the left edge, always turned away from the camera, always looking at the group with an expression he could not read because her face was never quite fully visible. He took the 1987 photograph down from the wall and carried it to his classroom. He put it on his desk and sat down and looked at it under the desk lamp. He looked at the girl at the left edge of the frame. He looked at what she was looking at. She was looking at a specific group of students in the middle of the photograph. He could see it clearly now that he was looking for it. Her body was angled toward them, her attention directed at a cluster of 4 students standing together in the 3rd row. He found the staff list from 1987 in the archive and cross-referenced the students in the photograph. He identified the 4 students she appeared to be watching. Then he searched for them. It took him the better part of an evening. He found all 4 of them. All 4 had died young, 2 in accidents, 1 from illness, one in circumstances the archived newspaper report described only as unexplained. All four within 3 years of the 1987 photograph being taken. Mr. Alderton sat at his desk for a long time. He thought about the figure at the left edge of every photograph going back 60 years. He thought about what she was looking at in each one. He went back to the corridor the following morning before school began. He looked at the most recent photograph, last year's whole school image. He found the figure at the left edge. He looked at what she was looking at. She was looking at a group of students in the second row. Mr. Alderton stood in the corridor and memorized their faces. He did not know what he was going to do with that information. He only knew that he was not going to ignore it, and that the figure at the left edge of every photograph since 1962 had never once looked at the camera, had never once looked outward, only inward, only at the students, only at specific ones, with the patient and unwavering attention of something that knew exactly what it was looking for and had all the time in the world to find it. Dunmore Secondary School had 31 classrooms. Every student and every member of staff knew this. 31 classrooms spread across 3 floors, each one numbered, each one assigned to a department and a timetable and a specific set of teachers and students who occupied it at specific times of the specific day. The school had been built in 1971. It had been extended once in 1989, when a new science block was added to the east side of the building. It had been refurbished in 2004 when the original corridor flooring was replaced and the windows were updated throughout. Every change, every extension, every refurbishment was documented in the school's administrative records, 31 classrooms. This was a fact that everyone at Dunmore Secondary knew without thinking about it, until a 15-year-old student named Joel thought about it. Joel was not a particularly remarkable student in most respects. He was middling academically. He was quiet without being withdrawn. He had a small group of friends and a genuine interest in history that his history teacher had noted and occasionally tried to nurture. He was also the kind of person who noticed things. He noticed the classroom at the end of the 3rd floor corridor on a Wednesday afternoon in February. He had been walking the 3rd floor corridor after school, looking for a friend he was supposed to meet. The corridor was empty. The school day was over, and most students had already left the building. He was almost at the end of the corridor when he realized he had walked further than he should have. He knew the 3rd floor corridor well. He had a classroom on it every day. He knew where it ended because he had walked it hundreds of times, but he was standing in front of a door he did not recognize. He stopped. He looked at the door. It was the same as every other classroom door in the building, the same design, the same handle, the same narrow rectangular window set into the upper half of the door at eye level. He looked through the window. A classroom. Desks arranged in rows, a board at the front, a teacher's desk positioned to one side, windows along the far wall letting in the grey February light. Completely ordinary, completely empty. He tried the handle. The door opened. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room. It smelled different from the other classrooms, not unpleasant. A specific smell that he associated with age rather than decay. Old paper and something underneath it that he could not identify. He stepped inside. The desks were old. Older than the furniture in the rest of the school. The kind of wooden desks with an inkwell hole at the top right corner that had not been standard in schools for decades. He walked to the nearest desk and looked at it. There were carvings in the wood, initials, names, the kind of things students had always done to school furniture when they thought no one was looking. He looked at the carvings, he read the names. He walked to the next desk. More names, more initials, more of the accumulated marks of students who had sat in these seats. He walked to the teacher's desk at the front. There was a register on it, an old one. A hardback register of the kind that had been used for school attendance records before computerized systems replaced them. He opened it. The register was filled in, dates and names and the marks indicating presence or absence, the careful handwriting of a teacher taking attendance. He looked at the most recent entries. The dates in the register were from 1973. He turned back through the pages. The register ran from September 1971, the year the school had opened, to June 1973, and then it stopped. No final entry, no end of term notation, just names and dates and attendance marks that simply ceased in the middle of what appeared to be a school week in June of 1973. He looked at the last page of entries. He read the names in the register. Then he closed it and put it back on the teacher's desk exactly as he had found it. He left the classroom and walked back down the corridor. He counted the classroom doors on his way. He counted them again, 32. He went home and found his mother, who had grown up in the town, and asked her if she had attended Dunmore Secondary. She said she had. He asked her if she remembered anything unusual happening at the school when she was a student. She was quiet for a moment. She said there had been something a long time ago, before she started there. She had heard about it from older students when she first arrived. He asked what it was. She said a classroom on the 3rd floor had been closed in 1973. She said she had never known exactly why, only that it had happened and that the room had been locked and taken off the timetable, and eventually everyone had simply stopped talking about it. She said she had assumed the room had been repurposed or incorporated into the refurbishments over the years. She asked him why he wanted to know. He told her he had found it. She put down what she was doing. She looked at him. She asked him what he meant. He told her about the Wednesday afternoon, the door at the end of the corridor, the old desks, the register from 1973. His mother was very still. He asked her if she knew what had happened in that classroom in 1973. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told him. A teacher had died in that classroom. Suddenly and without warning during a lesson. The students had been present when it happened. The school had closed the room afterward. Joel thought about the register on the teacher's desk. The entries that stopped in the middle of a school week in June of 1973. He asked his mother one more thing. He asked if she knew the teacher's name. She told him. He went back to school the following morning and walked the 3rd floor corridor. He counted the classroom doors, 31. He walked to the end of the corridor. There was no door at the end, just a wall, plain plaster, painted the same color as the rest of the corridor. He stood at the end of the corridor and put his hand flat against the wall. The plaster was cold. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to his first class of the day and sat down and opened his books and tried to concentrate on the lesson and tried not to think about the register on the teacher's desk and the name at the top of the last page of entries, not a student's name. The teacher's name, written in different handwriting from all the entries before it, written at the top of the final page in careful, deliberate letters, as though someone had wanted to make sure that whoever found the register would know that the teacher had not simply walked away, that the teacher was still there, still present, still marked in the register, the way a teacher marks themselves when they are the last one left in the room and have no intention of leaving.